Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your presence on a slightly rainy Friday for the festival to start. But I speak for everyone who's involved with the festival in every way, that we really appreciate everyone's presence here. And it's so special to be in person again. The theme of this year's festival is making connections. And I know that just seeing people's faces, hearing their voices, I think it's very special. And I'm really excited to welcome our guests to the event today. Our panel that we're going to be doing is The Art of Adaptation in Comics, and it's going to be the idea of classics reimagined. And so this is, there are so many interesting characters and stories and ideas in all of our cultural background, and many of these then inspire sort of spin-offs or re-envisionings of the classics. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And it was my pleasure to introduce my two, but maybe three guests today. And so first we have Caterina Grave. Okay, I tried. She's a Berlin-based illustrator and cartoonist. She's the author of multiple graphic novels, including The Last 23 Days of Plum and The Fat Princess Petronia, and as well as High Rise, which was a winner of the Maxim Moritz Prize. No, you're canceled. Get out of here. It's too late. It's too late. Next, we have Sasha Lefeve, who is a comic book artist and storyboard illustrator, and the co-creator, along with Jean-François La Liberté, of the ongoing sci-fi series You, Merlin. And then, last but not least, we have Salgood Sam, a.k.a. Max Douglas. He's an illustrator, cartoonist, and teacher. He's been a freelance artist for nearly 3 decades. He's the creator or co-creator of many comics, including Dream Life, Revolver, Therefore Repent, and Dracula, Son of the Dragon. And he's late.
It's why I'm late.
You're late.
Tired. It's been more than 3 days.
You finished Dracula Volume 2 just now?
No.
So, Max,
that's PTSD right there.
Max, you missed the tech specs, so we're going to ask you to draw in, and you're going to get cozy with your mic when you speak with it, so that we're going to record this for future generations to listen to us.
Is that better?
That's much better. It's perfect. Okay, perfect. And I was fussing with my phone to make it so it doesn't fall asleep, but I don't know how to do it, so we'll just move on from there. So, perfect. Cool. And so I'm just going to start with a couple different generalized questions, and if you are ever inspired to go off topic, that is perfectly fine. But I'll start with a general question for everybody, which is from a narrative point of view, what do you think is interesting about going back to classic characters, classic stories? Why were you in your various projects inspired to do so? And do you feel like how do you balance between a sort of respect for the source material and then just wanting to do your own thing and your own creativity? Sasha, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Okay, so when I imagine like doing an adaptation of any IP that already exists, okay, that's better. Okay, so when the adaptation that personally I don't like is when it's the same thing as let's say the book or something like that. I find like when you create something new and taking existing character and stuff, it's more interesting that you create new stories, even though the character already exists. When like in my books, like I take the King Arthur legend, but it's in the future. It's with giant robot fighting alien. Obviously, if you ever read anything with King Arthur, that doesn't happen. So for me, I find it's interesting to take characters that we think we know what the story gonna be, and then changing for my own story. But also, I try to be like true to, okay, those characters were invented to do that kind of attitude and stuff, so that should be reflected also while I create those attitude. If I do Lancelot, I think, and he's acting like this, that will be fun if I can use that a little bit in my story, but doing different story that the book that I read or the movie that I watched. I don't know if it makes sense a little bit.
I think it's a good start.
All right.
I understood.
Katharina, what about for you? You did a book very recently, I think, called Fat Princess Petronia, and it connects with The Little Prince, the book by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Can you talk a little bit about what you found inspiring about that?
Well, I had a kind of love-hate relationship to The Little Prince, and that's the reason I try to invent a character who is exactly opposite to him and shares my dislike. And that was, yes, the starting point. And it's more a spin-off than a one-to-one adaptation. And I think it's an advantage. It's the right word.
You can even use the wrong one. It's okay.
Advantage.
Advantage.
Yes. For the artist and the reader, this character is a fixed. Famous characters are fixed points in our crazy and over complex world, and I don't understand the war in the Ukraine, but I grew up with the Little Prince or the Knights of the Round Table, and so it's a little feeling home.
Okay.
At least at first glance, and then start to a new story.
Okay, excellent. Sam, what about you?
Well, I've done different kinds of adaptations, so it varied quite a bit. Dracula, which is the kind of the branded one that we're mentioning a lot now, was kind of a calculated move. So it was a collaboration with Mark Sable, and he basically didn't want to use IP that we came up with our own to sell to DC Comics, because that was originally the pitch. We were going to do a Zuda webcomic, which is a DC-owned webcomic platform, and they would own the IP if we did a deal with them. So the idea of doing something where, well, no one technically really owns it, and because it's
in the public domain. Yeah, it's definitely in the public domain.
You can have your version of it, but whatever. Was kind of his framing for why he wanted to do that. And then he wanted to take the idea of the character in the Bram Stoker books and the historical figure of Vlad Tepes and find a way to dovetail those stories. That's interesting. So it's kind of adapting historical fiction or history and pre-existing fiction and kind of working it together.
Right.
So that was interesting. It was very challenging because we were trying to be somewhat correct within the parameters of a fictional book. So I was doing a lot of research on Byzantine art, which it's interesting how the word Byzantine has become a word for ridiculously complex, drawing it a lot, very tedious. But I've got other projects, like I'm working on an adaptation of Tinderbox, where I just really liked initially started as a kind of an experiment, to strip down a story to its bones, get rid of all of the kind of identifying features and just look at the plot. And when I looked at the plot of that one, it's a very dark and strange story, and I like the idea of trying to do something with it. So I sat on it for a bit and then kind of came up with a fun way to sort of warp it and do something interesting.
Okay.
So it varies.
It depends on the
what
project,
catches you
of
about
course.
the thing and your motives at the beginning, like with Dracula.
Sure.
So.
Oh, I love it. Well, maybe that can lead us into talking a little bit about the idea of what bringing it to the comics medium does to a spin-off or adaptation or reimagining. So, for instance, Sacha, as you mentioned, in You, Merlin, it takes place on a space station in space called Camelot 2099, and all of the Knights of the Round Table are these sort of mecha. So what did you feel like? What was your approach to bringing some of the ideas that your collaborator was doing, and also the ideas that pre-existed, like in the Arthurian myths, visually to present those on the page as a comic?
That's a tricky one, because when I was young, I loved the Excalibur movie. So to me, that movie kind of put a visual on the stories. So I try when I designed all the mecha and robot, I was like, okay, I don't want to draw the exact costume that I saw for, let's say, that movie, or like a painting of King Arthur. I don't want to do the same thing, but I want to be inspired for what I like. And if I can put a little cameo, I will do it. I love to do that. I like, at one point in the background, when he construct this giant Hugh Merlin, which is basically the Merlin of the story, you can, like, his magic staff has two little tiny dragon, which is direct like the staff from that old movie. So I try to put a little cameo like that. But if I see, let's say, a color pattern from some kind of a character from like a Knight of the Round Table, like, oh, he's dressed in that color and dressed in that color, I'll try to put that also in my book. And I didn't not only just go in the book of King Arthur and stuff, but video games. There was like a old Super Nintendo video game called Knight of the Round, which also had nothing to do with the stories, but they took some characters and they fight giant knights like 10 feet tall, and they're like, but it's cool because they can do anything they want. That's another advantage by translating a story into a comic book versus into a movie is in a movie, okay, well, we have 20 million, good. I have 10,000 million in my book. I can do whatever I want. If I want to do a space station, and inside my space station I want to do a planet, and inside my planet I want to do a dinosaur, I can do that, which is also tricky because at one point you can get lost into it. But I find it's cool that the imagination is only what's stopping me from doing stuff like that. So I don't know, I'm kind of getting lost in it, but this is what I like about taking a story and putting in a comic book. I like it. I think it's fun to use the medium to do anything with it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And Katharina, your comic, one thing that's interesting is it visually references The Little Prince, right? You know, like anyone who's seen The Little Prince they'll immediately connect with the small person standing on top of a little tiny planet and things like that. But your comic is very much a comic, right? It's The Little Prince, of course, is an illustrated story. And your comic is quite playful, the way that you do your layouts on the page. Were there any... Tell us a little bit just about your process visually as you're approaching the book.
Oh, can you repeat your question?
Sure, or just if you would just talk a little bit about the art of the book and what your vision for the visual look of the book was.
Oh, okay. Yes, I try to to adaptate some advertising or Spielfelder.
Like
Heißt es game?
Like a
Gaming boards
Okay.
and so on. And sometimes the pages are normally comics, and sometimes it's a kind of advertising. Or yes, and yes, that was a great fun, but without any heavy reason.
The pages are designed to look like ads?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe just also even just the idea of, again, mixing and matching things and seeking your inspiration and just see where it takes you, sort of.
Yes, and The Little Prince is only the starting point, and then I can make everything. The planet and
No
the
budget.
planet and the planet and the
Yeah.
planet and the princess and the planet and planet and the princess.
See, now I'm very interesting. Now I
Yes.
want to read it.
It's a great advantage, yes.
Perfect. And then Sam, as you were mentioning, the Dracula book, it has there's a lot of that book is all about reconnecting the sort of supernatural horror of Dracula very much with like historical horror.
Yeah, and it was tricky because so I ended up drawing it essentially almost print size to try to avoid giving myself too much room to get lost in details because there's already a lot of it. But the catch for that is that it's very cramped, detailed work still.
Yes.
So it was interesting because there wasn't as much room to play in some ways because we were sort of bound by what was historically relevant at the time. I couldn't just go do whatever I felt like. I would have loved to, but it wasn't that kind of book. I think like the box adaptation is much more that, where I kind of sat on it for a bit. I like the weirdness of the plot, and then I saw the Dark Crystal TV series.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of remember my fondness for the movie, and that kind of became the cue for what I'm doing with that, which is just like weird. Whatever I feel like it's going to be, it's going to be fantasy, and make up as I go. So I've done a lot of different kinds of adaptations, and the ones that are the most fun are definitely like what they're talking about, where I'm the only person in charge. It's free reign. I can do what I want with this sort of nugget of an idea that I didn't have to come up with a spark, but now I can kind of riff off of it. And
Exactly.
That's always easier to write when there's something to begin with. The ones that have been less, like I also did the nursing ones I showed you. So that was all based on medical research.
Very different.
Very dry. And then how to make that interesting as a visual information source. So yeah, I can do those. I can do pretty well, I think, but they're not fun. They're kind of tedious.
Well, I find that very interesting as a through line in all of your work from just what we were just saying, So you're talking about how you're working on this adaptation of the Tinderbox, which is an old fairy tale for anyone who can't remember. And but then you're bringing in these influences from things that you're just seeing right now, so something like the Dark Crystal. And then Caterina, you're talking about the idea of like board games or advertising being a visual influence on your work. One that I thought of several times while I was reading your book is a Italian author, Italo Calvino. I don't know if you know him, but if you like him, I think you would like his work. Cosmic Comics is very much connected with a lot of the kind of games that you play. And then Sasha, I think that there's so much in your work is like taking from things like is like riffing on things like Pacific Rim, or even going further back, Robotech, or I was reminded of Captain Planet and things like that. There's a there's a kind of a fun vibe in the thing, and so maybe that's something interesting in all of your work, is that you're starting with something very classical as a touchstone, but then you're also allowing yourself to be influenced by all sorts of other things in the mix as well. So that's I think that might be interesting.
It's fun.
If I can
Of course.
add something about the way me and Jean-François, the writer of Hugh Merlin, we co-create the story, and then you put the words and I put the drawing. When we do adaptation, the way we like to work, like if I was going to do an adaptation of The Little Prince, I would do, let's say it's a sci-fi and it's the same kind of world of Hugh Merlin. Then they capture a creature. We don't know what the creature looks like, and they put a creature in a giant container, and we're like, we don't know what's in it. Then I would put 3 little holes in the container, and only people can see and imagine what that creature will look, and that would be an adaptation of the sheep thing in the box. Remember, in my memory, that's what happened, right? It draw me a sheep or something. So I wouldn't put someone asking to draw a sheep in my story, but I would keep that idea of there's something in it, we don't know what it looks like, it'll look different for you than for you, and that container will represent that box. So that would be the way I would adapt stuff.
Yes, and Petronia, my princess, if she see this locked box, she think about Schrödinger's cat and not a cute sheep. That is the difference between Petronia and the Little Prince.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Well, Katharina, I think that's a perfect segue. I was quite curious. You already mentioned it, that Petronia, the character, and it seems to reflect your own personal point of view, that has a sort of antagonistic relationship with her cousin, the little suck-up, the Little Prince. Can you talk a little bit about your why, when you were approaching this project, you had sort of an antagonistic feeling to it, and then the ways that allowed your creativity to flow?
I've mentioned it. I have a kind of love-hate relationship to him, and I thought when I was a child, I really loved him, and my mother read it to me, and I saw him at the theater at Christmas and so on. But over the years, my reading of this story changed, and now I think he is. It's a kind of cheap consensus, only merchandising, and you can buy him as bed clothes, it's right, yes, and plates and cups and snow globes, and yes, I lost. And pardon?
He's been hollowed out.
Yes. It's a buyout. It's a buyout, and he makes me aggressive. This whole thing, it's a kind of pseudo-religious and trivial story, and and Petronia is she rebels against these kind of merchandising, and she's a little bit a punk, and that's the reason I love her and the reason to create her.
Perfect. I love it. I find that that's all very interesting. The idea that sometimes, Sam, I even get the same impression from your work with Dracula. Sometimes it almost feels like there's like a little bit of a love-hate or tension with the source material.
Well, that's a whole other drama, love-hate thing with that whole project. Short version, it was supposed to take 3 months, it took 7 years. So
that'll do it, right?
Yeah. I'm actually often attracted to technically demanding projects. That's sort of the way my brain's wired. I get off on the problem solving. But at the same time, one of the things I've been learning, so a good chunk of my career, I wasn't a writer. I had dyslexic as a kid.
Okay.
I think that was a thing I was going to do. I got work at Marvel and stuff like that. I was always working with writers. And I continuously was frustrated by various different things about the writers, and not the least being the kind of lack of imagination and things they would ask me to do. I would make myself do way more bizarre, zany, or complicated things than any writer has ever dared put in a script. And I would just get bored working on their stuff. So I'm finding myself a lot more playful with the storytelling. So we were talking before about like getting to do whatever you want. You don't have a budget constraint. It's sort of up to you.
Exactly.
And then on top of that as well, probably my own worst enemy in terms of like, yeah, I'm going to do a 4-page spread with 1 million characters because that's what I want. And even if it is going to take me way too long, that's going to happen. So, yeah, I think answering your question is just
I think so.
Kind of following my whether it's good or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas Dracula was and anytime I'm working with someone else's script, I always feel confined by it. So in the long run, especially if it takes very long to get done.
Well, maybe that's a double bind too, right? Because you have your collaborator, and so and even if it's a great collaboration, there can sometimes be the friction and yep.
Like Therefore Repent was a pretty positive collaboration. We're still both like, it's okay. We both see a version of it that we could have done if the other person wasn't involved.
That's interesting. And then there's perhaps even like the ghost then of Dracula looming behind, like the ghost of Bram Stoker then looming behind everything in some way. No, you don't care?
No, I didn't think about Bram Stoker at all. I thought about how to make this an interesting story, and then I found that the script that Mark initially wrote to not be where I wanted to go. I was a co-writer, so I got to come and play with it, but then that was a thing where if I did everything I would have liked to have done to make it a book I'd essentially be erasing Mark's work.
Okay, I see.
So I had to draw the line way shy of where I would have liked it. And there's a lot of stuff in the book that I just never would have done. I don't care about people riding around on horses that much.
There are a lot of horses in it.
There are a lot of horses in it. And I mean, I was okay at drawing horses before that, but I had to practice. And there's a lot of going places on horses in that book.
Well,
I kept asking me, can we just get there in the next one? Do we have to actually go there on a horse?
Well, when Sasha mentioned that there's no budget in comics, I always laugh at that because it's true there's no monetary budget, but there's your time, and I often think about that whenever it's very true. People often say, and sometimes I'll hear writers saying it about their artists, and they say, well, I can just invent anything, and my artist can just draw it, but then you have the time. The time is the budget that goes into that.
Well, when I was younger, not my first comic book because I draw all my life, but one of the comic book that we would try to publish was a Western, and there was some magic in it. And back then, drawing a horse, not so much. I say, what if we draw a giant lizard instead of horse? So,
sure.
Yeah, no budget. I draw a lizard instead of horse. So all the cowboys were riding lizard. I was like,
we're wrangling it.
The wizards were ugly too. So back then they kind of looked like Komodo dragon and stuff. But now when I've drawn a horse with the reference, there's an excuse, right?
So in reading you, Merlin, like the cast is very diverse by its very nature. It's presented like in the text in a very clear way. Like all the characters come from different nationalities. They have their flags on their patches.
Yeah.
Why was it important to you and your co-collaborator to kind of well, number one, was that important? It seems important to me from the outside. Was that important? And tell us a little bit about why you thought that was important, especially in the context of dealing with a story or an idea that already exists, like with King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table.
Well, since the premise is quite different from the Knight of the Round Table and all of that, it's about a station and there's an invader, and the invader attacked the planet, so it was kind of normal for us that it's the planet that altogether create those mecha, like you were mentioning. So it should represent the planet and it's not just the US versus the alien or the Canadian or anything. So from the beginning, we're like, okay, we want people from all around the world. That's important. That makes sense that together they will protect the planet, because that's the idea. And there's a little bit of flavor from the Stargate universe. Well, then I was a big fan of the Stargate Atlantis. I think they still do that in the Stargate normal, but they have all the flags on one side of, like, they probably have the Stargate flag and then the flag from where they are. And I thought it was cool because one of them was Canadian. I was like, I can tell this is a flag here. I know what my country flag is. So I was like, well, we should put that a little bit in it. It will make sense. Like, well, we can see like the Canadian flag here. It makes sense that they will be proud from where they are, and on the other shoulder, where they are right now, which is the Camelot 2099, which is also a thing for the Marvel 2099 thing. I was like, yeah, we should put that in.
Do you know you're sitting with Marvel 2099 royalty right here?
I did 2 books. not a royalty, but
well, still a lot.
2 unpublished books.
Oh, but that doesn't count.
I did a couple of issues of Ghostwriter 2099 that never got printed. Oh no, and I did a Ravage story that got printed. There you go. Yay.
Katharina, there's a very distinct quality of gender in your book. You know, very obviously, like Petronia is she's a girl, she's a woman, and and again, there's an extension of that conflict with her cousin. You know. And there's even a point where she imagines herself as a boy, and all the ways, and I'll even quote. I thought it was quite interesting. So she imagines herself as a boy. She says, "If I were a boy, the universe would think that I was assertive rather than bossy, rational rather than cold, confident rather than cheeky, educated rather than precocious." And I wonder. Can you just elaborate a little bit about that, like the way that that changing elements, like in this case changing the gender, but as Sasha was saying, changing the nationalities of characters or where they're coming from, can reframe your story and the original story?
Well, I exploit the Little Prince shamelessly, and to tell my own jokes or my own stories. And this question of gender and of feminism is an important thing for me, and so I use him or my figure, my character, to tell this and make it to a topic of some of these episodes. And it's a good way. This whole series is a good way for me to tell my jokes, and some jokes are about gender and feminism.
And so it just emerges naturally because it's a reflection of the reality, what you're interested in, what the everything about it. It's a natural extension of that. Yes, and I can use it for every topic in this world, and that's great fun, and that's interesting for me. Perfect. I love it. Now, so you've all done different projects with different characters and kind of moving around in the ideas. Is there anything that you have in your mind that I think a lot of artists think about a character or a story or something that's a point of inspiration and they would like to follow it. Is there anything that's on your mind right now that you think could be an interesting project in the future that connects with this idea of a riff on something? I know, Sam, that you're working on the tinderbox, and so I know you're in the process of giving birth to one baby, but I'll ask you to think about, do you have any other creative children in the future that you're imagining?
So to start with, like I like writing a lot, it turns out.
Okay.
Despite that early concern. It's actually a lot easier than drawing comics. Like just more playful and much faster to do. And my biggest issue is I don't let myself do it very often because I would never get it all done. I would never have enough time to draw it all. So I have a ton of ideas that I'm kind of slow burning. I've got a very another adaptation project relevant to the panel that I've been playing with. That's a book that I read when I was in my early 20s that I really liked, and I contacted the author and got permission to mess with it to see if I can come up with something.
Can you tell us more about that?
It's Louis Schreiner Slam is the book. Slam's the book. Louis Schreiner's the author. And he's done a few comics, but he's mainly a book writer. And he was game for the idea, so we have an informal agreement that I can mess around and see what comes up out of it.
Okay.
And that one, initially I was thinking of just doing a straight adaptation, but then when I revisited it, I realized it would be difficult, both in just in like trying to capture everything. That could be a very big book that doesn't necessarily need to be a big book. And then also it's got a lot of stuff in it that doesn't age well. So I'm kind of debating, like, do I cut it? Do I just show it as it is? Do I...
May I ask when that book is from?
Probably the 80s.
Okay.
And like, so one of the main things that I'm debating how to handle if I use it at all. So the basic premise is a guy who was a white-collar criminal, dodged his taxes and stuff, did some time in jail, and we meet him just as he's getting out. And he's sort of he's becoming an anarchist, and he's on the verge of deciding society's crazy. When he was in jail, he basically bought protection from other people in the jail by having sex with his roommate. And he has this complicated sort of rapey relationship with his ex-roommate, a cellmate. And that guy shows up later on the inside. And it's handled problematically, although probably sort of honest for the depiction of what that character would think. It's still also like, do I just show that as it is and how this straight white guy is going to deal with it? Or
you're in the danger zone.
Do I want to alter that or not? It's kind of central to the story, so I can't just avoid it. So there's lots of little things like that in it because it's the 80s. There's all sorts of stuff in there, not just that one. So I have to ask myself, how much do we keep, or what do I do?
Perfect.
And there's other things. I'm always thinking about interesting ideas to drive it.
Katharina, so I'll also add two things to this. So number one, are there any other characters or ideas that you find really inspiring? And number two, I'm curious, does Petronia have any other adventures ahead of her?
I remain faithful to her.
Okay,
and,
she's your muse.
And
one character.
One character, one life, one character. It's my current work. The series goes on, and every month I draw an episode for the German magazine Das Magazin, and the next book will Petronia too. So it's yes, she's at my side, by my side, the whole time.
But no, well, when you reach the end of the book, you definitely get that impression that that her interrogations of the world, she doesn't go on adventures exactly because she usually stays on her planet, but she goes on mental voyages in some ways, and it seems like that you've created an engine for creating stories and exploring ideas. You could just keep going on with it for eternity.
Yes, the book is first I create this for a magazine. It's a monthly strip, and the book is the first 2 years, I think, from the series, and I draw it now, and it's a current work. So it goes on and on and on. It's endless. It's a kind of endless series.
Perfect.
So.
And Sasha, I know you Merlin is a series. It's not completed. It's continuing on.
Yeah, in 6th volume.
Do you have a plan for it to end at the 6th volume? Is that okay?
We already know how it's going to finish. I have other ideas for other projects, some that are actually in development that I don't know what I can say about it. So but we, like in the 2nd volume, we had more character that had nothing to do with the Knight of the Round Table. There's a king, and the king is in danger, and his bodyguards are actually the musketeers. The musketeer? I don't know.
The musketeers? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, we'll see. So that was another adaptation to put in it.
Okay, so that's pulling it in different, again, pulling in, it's a mix. It's mixing in multiple references and ideas.
They don't have giant mecha, but they do have power armor because they're on Earth, so they don't have like anything to breathe in space. So the different kind of look to it. And things happen to those characters. They're not the main characters, they're more like a side characters. And the way the things happen to them reflect the real story, but in a different kind of way. So if a musketeer die in the book, the way he die, we try to translate that. So if that character die, so that was fun to do it. There's other characters to come. The main focus is the Knight of the Round Table, but sometimes it's fun to put like, okay, let's put this character, let's put this character, and other project. This is the tricky part, because you think of a cool idea, and then you open your mouth, and people are like, no, don't say about it. So, but I think the next project won't have any adaptation character from any stories, but it might have some mythological aspect to it. Like I have an idea that's more like Viking-esque. Okay. So I'm definitely gonna grab stuff that we know about, like Odin and Thor and stuff like that. So that'll be interesting.
Very, very much so. I feel like there's also an element that I'm getting from this conversation, which is the prevalence of remix in our culture and the way we approach art. And I've always found that to be a sort of fascinating vector where different threads of art come together and then they get remixed into something new, and of course, at a very top level, we have this in music all the time. There's all this idea of music, but now I feel like it's spread out from there, and it's absolutely everywhere. It's everywhere in our narratives, in films, and also obviously in comic books. As all three of you are riffing on, remixing, tweaking, recombining things in new different directions. What was that? Mashups. You gotta mash it all up.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Well,
every time I encounter like a new piece of mythology or it's an interesting news story, part of my brain's always like, oh, that'd be an interesting comic.
What element could you bring in to the story? Oh, I love it.
And that's like a seed for a comic, and what could you do with it?
When I pitch a story, they always say like, do the elevator pitch or do like a comparison. Let's say the Alien movie. It's Jaws in space, basically. So that's actually what we did. We're like Knight of the Round Table in space and stuff like that. So it's super interesting to mix stuff like that. For me, anyway, like when I watch a movie and they put two things very different, very apart, and they make a movie. Like I remember there's a cheap, I say cheap, it's like not a famous horror movie, but I think it's called I guess it's a B movie, The Collector, which is a home invasion, and the guy go to steal stuff, and it turns out the house has been booby-trapped by like a Jigsaw kind of character. So you have like, but it's all like he's came in here in the house to steal stuff, and then it's like full booby trap and gross trap and stuff like that. So I think it's really cool when that matchup was the right word.
But there's something I didn't say it first, and I never remember who said it. But one maxim I really like is less reboots and more rip-offs. I think it's really great when people just recreate their own thing. Instead of like, Sam, you've worked on a variety of like corporate sort of IP, like Ghostbusters and things like that, and like Terminator, and things that like exist, and there's a pressure on.
It's a paying job.
Yep, it's a lot. Hey, I'm all about getting paid, but it's interesting how there's a need of the system to keep the certain IP rolling, and
Marvel's an IP mill.
Yeah, and I always encourage artists to think about the ways that they can just straight up rip off things that and be inspired and go in their own direction, because there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, and all three of your work is showing the ways that you can start from a point of departure and then go completely in another direction. You can have, like, your work can include criticisms of the original work, as we were talking about with Katharina. It can be just that you love certain elements and you want to bring them out, or you can be mashing up all kinds of different things. I think that that's a very inspiring way for artists who are maybe worried or afraid of their own creativity and getting there's can be a lot of a block when you start working.
Where the box started. I think I mentioned in the email.
Yes, exactly.
That it was a project I was teaching in a comic class, and you get people who are like, I want to write stuff, and they get there and they're frozen. They can't think of where to start. So the pitch was to them, so look at something, public domain, old fairy tales or whatever, strip off all the specifics and just look at the plot.
Yeah.
And there's your seed. Start there. This and this is going to happen to your character. Now, who is it? Why does it matter? Change all those particulars and run with it. Because it's a lot easier to write, essentially kind of playing catch with something or someone, than to just sit there just staring at the blank page and like start from scratch.
Okay.
So using all these things, these ideas as seeds to react against, or something that was part of your makeup that is formative to you, because it kind of sounds like Little Prince was that for you, that where you get to riff off of it. It's really much simpler to react that way and just sort of come up with a lot of material that way than just trying to pull something whole cloth new.
Right, it's the difference between starting with the blank canvas and starting with something even with one mark on it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Gabriel, do we have it's not Gabriel anymore, but do we have the capacity to take questions from the audience if they have them at the mic, or it's too hard to do? Can we? I'm going to ask, and maybe no one's going to have a question, so it might be a moot point. But I'll be able to start with. But we have a mic up here. If there's anyone, and I can pass it over to you instead of having you get up. But does anyone have any questions? I'll bring you the mic, and we can ask questions of our panelists. Going once, going twice, going three times. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all. So I'm going to ask my last, and it's a very basic question, which is where we can find more of your work. And so I'm going to ask both that you talk a little bit about like where people online can find your work and things like that, but also here at the festival, like are you doing a signing, where we can find your work, is available in English, French, etc. And maybe Sasha, we'll start with you at the end.
Yeah, because that will be very short. Well, I only did like one series, right? So right now it's only in French. We would love to be like in different language and all around the world, but it's starting, and it's something about selling the right and stuff like that. So right now I have 4 volumes of Hugh Merlin with the publisher, éditeur,
Publisher.
Édition Michel Quintin, which I'm going to the booth to sign right after this at the D77. So here's the plug, and I'll be there all weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And I usually do pretty much every close book fair thing, like Salon du Livre de Montréal, the Quebec one, and Comic Con. I'm always at Comic Con. I have my table there too. So this is a good place to buy the books. Obviously, my books are in the bookstore in French here, and you can also buy them online. I think on leslibrairies.ca. Okay. I think that's a place where it helps the small bookstores to sell them. So that's a start.
And perfect. And online, where can people find your work? Like on the social media or website?
I usually go by Sacha Illustration. So if you Google Sacha Illustration, that should be me. I do my most presence are on Instagram. I have a little bit on Facebook, but people who start on Facebook realize the algorithm is it's not the best for an artist, so you go on Instagram and stuff like that. I do have a TikTok, but yeah, there's nothing much there. It's me dancing. No, that's not true. It's there's.
Well.
Oh yeah, now interesting, huh? But mostly it's my Instagram that I feed more.
And just to clarify, that's Sasha with a CH, right?
Yes,
SCHA.
SACH, and illustration like stuck together. You should be able to find it.
Perfect. Katharina.
Oh, well, I think there are some of my German books in the library from the Goethe Institute here in Montreal. And Petronia was published in French, and the publisher called Exert.
Okay.
Exert, and there you can find The High Rise 2. And in English, it will be available in July.
Okay.
Princess Petronia. And yes, and all the German stuff you can find at my homepage or Instagram, Facebook, and so on, Caterina Grave.
Perfect. And
well, so the most recent book I have out is the Dracula book. That's from Dark Horse, and so you can get it at a lot of comic shops. I think several in town have it, and then also you can also, it's a partnership with Comixology Originals, so it's on Amazon. My own self-published stuff is also up there, and you can get it from me on Gumroad, either print-on-demand orders or digital. And you can find me salgoodsam.com. All the things linked to there. Next thing I'm working on is probably going to be a little while before it gets done. So,
sure.
Not sure when that's going to happen.
Well, we all have a lot on our plate, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So, and I just realized I'm the least important person up on stage, but I've never introduced myself. I will just really briefly. If you enjoyed the sound of my voice or want to hear me talk about art or anything like that, I do that. My name is François Vigneault. I'm a cartoonist. I have my books available at various places here, and I also am the host of a podcast called Apples to Giraffes, which is all about the adaptation of literature into movies, into graphic novels, and things like that. So I'm the least important person here, but I will at least mention that.
I forgot. I'm at B24.
B24.
That's my table.
That's perfect. Oh, and Katharina, are you doing any signings here? Do you know?
Yes, yes. After this.
After this?
Panel B50.
B32, Planet BD.
At Planet BD. Okay, perfect. At B32. So.
Right
thank you all to our audience members here for being here. We're going to be having more panels here and throughout the festival all along Saint-Denis all weekend. I'm back with another panel on living cities tomorrow, and that's going to be a lot of fun. Once again, let's just have a little round of applause for our panelists. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.